Morning, everyone, and welcome to PAS's deep dive into performance and caseload management around development management that we've snappily entitled Backlog Busters. Backlog issues or applications in hand is something that we at PAS experience a lot engaging with different local authorities, and our recent support of councils using money through the Planning Skills and Delivery Fund to address their backlogs has sort of brought that into focus. So we thought it would be really timely to have a bit of a deep dive into various local authority stories on how they approach a management of caseload for officers, but also that kind of prediction of forward performance, or how they've used their funds to kind of tackle particular backlog issues. And we know that actually backlog means different things for different people. For some authorities, that essentially means the number of applications kind of in hand is bigger than it used to be. For some councils, it means that there is a kind of bottleneck around validation, and there's kind of big caseloads that haven't yet been allocated officers. We know that actually for some authorities, it's not really the planning application side of things. It's all the other applications that form part of that don't form part of PS1 returns. So discharge of conditions, non-material amendments, or even kind of high pre-app caseloads. So we wanted to take a bit of a look and hear from stories on the front line, on the coal face, of where local authorities are tackling some of these issues, and not in the best of circumstances. So we deliberately haven't chosen councils who've got it all sorted, because they're sort of rarity, really. So we really wanted to hear from councils where they're doing this really difficult improvement work in quite challenging circumstances. So we're going to hear from authorities that have been designated, councils that are facing financial difficulties through 114 notices, and are still kind of making the wheels go round and implementing some of these changes. So hopefully it's going to be a really, really good session, and lots of kind of practical tips around performance and caseload management. So you can see from the screen that we're going to be using Slido for this function. So this is the first time PAS are using the webinar function of MS Teams. So it's been a little bit seat of our pants this morning in terms of the technical run through, but fingers crossed it's all gonna work appropriately. And we're going to leave that slide up for a little bit so that you can kind of log on to Slido. We are going to be capturing questions as the speakers talk, and then stopping for a kind of break in the middle, and then a break at the end to handle some of those questions. If when putting your questions through Slido, if you're able to indicate which speaker or which council you particularly like to aim a question at, or whether you'd like to aim a question at PAS, then please could you do so? That's going to help my colleague on the line. So let's kick off with some introductions. So my name is Shelley Rouse. I'm Principal Consultant at the Planning Advisory Service, and I kind of lead on the capacity and capability sort of skills and resources side of Planning Advisory Service, but I also support my colleague Peter Ford with the development management and designation support. So Peter, I'm just going to bring you onto the call and you can say hello to everybody.
Hi everybody.
There we go. That's a good test of does the screen sharing work. Great. So we are going to start with hearing from Nicola from Croydon, who's going to tell us all about how she's managed to tackle her backlog and micromanage some of her caseloads around EOTs. Bear with me, I'm going to bring you onto screen and stop sharing. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen and then I'll be with you all. Being a little bit so there we are. So hello everyone, I'm Nicola Townsend. I'm the Head of Development Management at Croydon Council. This morning, really, I'm not going to say anything radical. I'm just going to explain sort of how we ended up in a mess and how we are getting ourselves out of our backlog position. And I think what the telling sign is once you're in a backlog position, it can take an incredible amount of time to get out of it, much faster than the downward slide. So I've called it the Croydon Diaries. It seems a shame to be harking back to 2020, but I'm afraid it is part of the reasons why we found ourselves where we did. We had quite a challenging 2020 to 23. Those of you remember those days of going into the pandemic and all of a sudden working from home. But in that time, we also had some internal difficulties. We were one of the early councils to issue Section 114 notices, the first of which was in autumn 2020. We had almost a complete new executive leadership team at that time. We had a government assurance panel come in to help deal with our financial difficulties and to guide us as a whole organisation as to where we should be going. And on top of that, because of our financial difficulties in that 2020, we had a 15% increase in council tax, which meant our customers were expecting increased service for their money. But obviously that wasn't a position we were necessarily in. So there was an awful lot of disruption that we were experiencing at that time. Not only did we have a new internal staff leadership, we changed from our political leadership model, and we had a new mayor. We had mainly new councillors, most of whom had never sat on planning committee or been a councillor before. There was an awful lot of building of relationships and explaining what we did. Planning had been in the spotlight during the local elections, and there was an expectation of change. And one of our policy documents was immediately on the first day of the mayor's new period was revoked. And we were left sort of in a position of, well, where are we going to deliver the housing? What is acceptable to our elected representatives? And we had a huge number of refusals, and we still do. And the question of how many appeals is hundreds, which was definitely distracting us from dealing with applications on time. At the same time, we were trying to review our local plan. So lots going on. We knew we were in a mess, and I think this is why Shelley asks me to do these things, because the best thing we did was call in the Planning Advisory Service. We didn't ask them to come in and say, you're underperforming. We knew we were in a mess and that the downward spiral was quite significant. We'd also had new political leaders who'd heard a lot on the doorstep that they didn't think we were doing the right job. So it's quite useful to actually have the Planning Advisory Service come in, review us and say what we were doing well. So we could actually say, actually, we're not a half bad team. And actually then say, but actually, these are the areas that we can improve. And actually, that's been backed up by an independent critical friend. We also had Paz in to come and do decision-making training with us and with our members, so they understood the context in which they were working. So where did we find ourselves? Prior to all of our problems, this was an easy week. This is what we did week in, week out. We received about 100 applications. And when I talk about this, I mean all applications, from those which are reportable to government, to tree works, to NMAs, to discharge of conditions. So we got 100 in and we determined 100. Most applications have an 8-week lifespan. So our ideal caseload was 800 for the staffing levels we had. Pretty easy. No. There was definitely, we needed to rise to the challenge, and I think it's fair to say we were sinking. So this is where we ended up, and you can see how quickly from 2020 our on-hand caseload increased. 2017 to 2020, it was always just over the 800 mark, but it rapidly increased to in 2022, we actually had nearly 1,600 and probably 300 applications awaiting validation. Officers were sinking, they didn't know what to prioritise first, and we really knew that we had to do something to reverse that trend. And as you can see on that slide, in 2023, it came down back to about the 900 mark, and actually now we're just above the 600 mark. So reversing it relatively quickly, but it is a 2-year period, so maybe not that quick, I don't know. So we didn't set out to do 3 different phases of how you tackle your backlog. But actually looking back with hindsight, that's what we've done. The first thing we did is we stole the idea of clearance weeks off other local authorities. There was a lot of information in the press at the time that other local authorities had put up the barricades, turned off the phones, turned off the emails, and just focused on decision making. And actually we stole that idea, and that's what we did. And I think the first clearance week we did, there was a huge amount of effort that went into it from myself and the other management team in the service to get us ready. We had team meetings, we created spreadsheets of cases that needed to be determined. We basically got anybody who was sort of a manager rolling up their sleeves, helping write up applications, helping determine applications. And it was basically a chip in. And what was amazing for us was in that first week, we actually determined 300 applications in 1 week, which was just fantastic. But I think it was a bit of a case of panic. Just determine something, get it out the door, get rid of it. But in those weeks, we did do full prep. We brought officers on board, and we actually did comms with our councillors and our residents and our applicants and said, we will not be talking to you in that week. It is not business as usual. And we had full buy-in. In about a 14-month period, we probably did 9 of those. They were most effective in probably the first 4. After that, there maybe clearance week fatigue set in. There also became a bit of a feeling in the council, I think, that it was business as usual and clearance week. So they weren't as effective as they could be the more we did. So we knew that we had to do something else. And actually, timeliness happens. So along came the Planning Skills Delivery Fund. So we did do a bid at that time, and I think this is what we'll basically call phase 2. This is very much our targeted determination of over 26-week files. So back in August 2023, I wrote a very hopeful bid, I think, for backlog funding. And this is what I said. I said that our objective was to have no more than 800 files on hand at any one time. Tick, we've done that, but with no more than 20% out of time by September 24. I'll come on to that. Objective 2 was to have no applications older than 26 weeks unless they were subject to an EOT or a PPA. And then the third one was to embed a new culture around the planning guarantee moving to 16 weeks. So where are we? So this is a frightening slide. And somebody said to me recently, how did you sleep at night in January 2022 when we had 467 applications that were over 26 weeks? As you can see, that's come down dramatically, and it is a targeted week in, week out determination. We're actually now at 114, and I did that in order to prep for this session. I did the check. 74 of those have got an EOT, 40 without. Some of those are discharge of conditions. So there's a bit of work for me to do following this session to find out why. But the way we're going, I mean, 30 of those have also already got a resolution to grant, and they're sat with legals. So it is slow, but it's targeted, and it's proving that it works. So I email all officers every Monday a very irritating email that tells them what is 26 weeks old, what is 25 weeks old and needs to be determined this week. Don't add it to the backlog. What is 15 weeks old? What is 7 weeks old? And officers get that email every Monday to help them target their workload for the week. So going back to that, 20% will only be out of time. We're not there yet. So whilst the overall caseload has come down to 616, which is amazing considering where we were 2 years ago, actually 40% or just under 40% of our applications are out of time. But it was nearly 60% in January. So by the time September comes round, I'm hoping that we will have, the targeted monitoring will get us to where I said we were going to be, with only 20% over 8 weeks by September. So we will see. So now we're entering phase 3, I think, of our backlog targeting. And we're very much asking the question now, what didn't get determined last week? So to date, our focus has been on, yes, we got out things that were due to expire. We dealt with so much off the over 26-week list, but actually we haven't looked at what slipped onto the backlog, what slipped over 8 weeks old or what slipped over 13 weeks old and why. And that's very much the conversation we're having now with officers to try and identify any trends. Is it because we haven't had the highways comments? Is it because we consistently haven't had conservation comments? Is it something else? Is it technology? So that's very much the third phase of our targeting that we've entered into. We've also tried if you add to the backlog, you have to take 2 backlog cases out. And that is not really it's more of a sort of message. We're not monitoring that strictly, but it's very much a case of, well, if you're going to add that onto the backlog, what can you take off? And we're trying to identify what's going out of time and why. So the tools of the job, how are we doing this? And I'm afraid I'm a to-do list person, and therefore it won't come as any surprise to you that it's data. Data is king. I know our caseload backwards. I know some of our officers' caseloads probably better than they know themselves. And the amount of data that I have provided to me on a weekly basis, which is then shared between the managers and all the officers, is exactly what means we can focus where the attention needs to be focused. So we have a meeting with our director every Monday morning, and for that meeting we have a report that says what we've received, what we've validated, what hasn't been validated, how many applications we determined, how many were on time, how many enforcement cases we've determined, how many planning appeals we've got. So it's full caseload management, and that's reported to the director every Monday morning. We also have the crystal ball of performance, so we know what we're determining, where we are on the rolling 2-year figures for minors and others, and how many EOTs we're using to get to those figures. I also get every week the full on hand caseload, and then this is just an example. We get every week or every month individual officer performance, so the managers can look at that and think, well, X only got that many out that week, but they were on annual leave for half of it. But it does mean we can start to target any issues where there might be problems. So my lessons learned, we're in 3 phases of backlog clearance, and we certainly didn't set out to do 3 phases. They have happened and we've adapted as the pressures have required us to. I suppose the lessons learned are really don't overdo a good thing. Clearance weeks worked for a while and they were really good, but they're not the only solution. They're not the solution. Don't just have the data, interrogate it, know it backwards. And it takes time to embed a new culture. So we were sending the emails to the team and saying, look at this. And then they were saying, well, I don't have that information. And it was like, we were then showing people how to interrogate the spreadsheet, sort and filter so they only saw what was relevant to them. So I guess don't assume it's happening, make it happen. Ask people, do they know how to find the data they need? We set clear priorities each week. It's things expiring, approaching 8 weeks, then it's the things approaching the planning guarantee, then it's get rid of things off the over 26-week list or get an EOT. And what sort of surprised me was just how reliant we are on others to get things over the line. When I look at our over 26-week list, 1/3 of it is sat with the solicitors, or we're waiting on applicants. So it's how we target that to make sure there's enough resource in other teams to give us the service that we require to get the applications out the door. And that's the tale from Croydon.
Thanks, Nicola. That's great, and I'm really happy to see that you use the PAS crystal ball tool and you've kind of adapted it and strengthened it. So I'm sure Pete won't mind me saying we've had to go at tinkering with it to now embed a with EOT, without EOT function. And we're going to be making that available on the website alongside the recording and the slide presentations from this as well. So anyone can see what their performance might look like if EOTs do at some point kind of disappear from householders or majors as well. Great. So we're now going to hear from Mark and Florence at Lancaster. So by the magic of the webinar, Nicola, I'm going to take you off screen, and Mark and Florence, I'm going to bring you on, and I'm going to exit the screen as well so it's not too crowded.
Yeah, Shelley, before we start, can you see my screen? Super. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Just a bit of introductions. My name is Mark Potts. I'm the service manager at Lancaster City Council. I've been here now since 2015. Beforehand, I worked in the private sector. I've got my colleague Florence Henriksen, who you want to introduce yourself, Flo?
Hiya, I'm Florence. I'm the senior planning and building control technician. I've worked in the department for 7 years now.
Okay, so let's just change the slide. Okay, so in terms of in Lancaster, we had a bit of a problem, as many authorities did during the kind of COVID exercise. That's when things kind of went terribly wrong for us, basically. So with COVID beforehand, we were doing really well as an authority. We were determining on time. Our on-hand rate was absolutely fine. We were basically determining what we were getting in. Then basically March 2020 happened and it kind of all went catastrophically wrong, really, for us. I think critically as a team, we really struggled to working at home. The mandate from the council at that perspective was home working was the done thing. And I think for us, it didn't really kind of work. But the backlog really started to really kind of kick off for us in Q3 in 2020. Obviously, many on the call will know is there was that little bit of a lull period from like March to April, and things really started to kind of ramp up. Coupled with that, the issue for us is that we had people then going off with sickness. That happened. We really struggled to actually fill roles, which was a real shame, really, in some ways, because whilst we had roles, and we'll come on to this in a later slide, we just couldn't fill those kind of posts in it, which was a real kind of concern for us. And I think what the situation was is that when people were going off on sick, then that obviously the burden was then shifted to elsewhere within the council. Also, as a council as well, there's quite a lot of people within the department who were seconded to other opportunities in relation to COVID, and that lasted a long time for us as a council. Some posts were 15 months in post in terms of doing that, so we had a bit of a problem. So in order to help the situation, what happened at that point in time is we stopped allocating planning applications. So we get to January 2021, basically we shut up shop. We don't allocate because the offices had too many applications at that point in time. This is where it started to kind of go wrong, however. So we had a period where we weren't allocating. When I say we weren't allocating, we were still allocating like some prior approvals. Anything that had to be determined, we were, but anything which didn't need to, we weren't. So we get to July 2021, and at that point in time, we had 80 applications awaiting validation. Florence will talk about the technical team's input into this because that was kind of critical, really, to helping us move forward. But we have 467 applications awaiting validation. The issue with that is we had 30, well, you can see from the slide, we had a lot of money at risk. And that was kind of my concern at that point in time. The problem with it was we had applications 6 months out of date. So in terms of the major applications that we had, which was the bulk of the fees, we were essentially having to agree in the OT before it was actually allocated to an officer. So this is what created the problem for us. We were on the back foot literally from day one, which kind of created the problem. We had a very successful pre-application advice service, which we introduced probably about 2015, 2016. That had to be completely part while we kind of dealt with the backlog before us. The concern with that is we had to refund all of the 50 ones there. That equated to in the region about £13,000–14,000. So what we did in terms of this, so we were kind of fortunate that we had a local plan which came into place in 2019. And back in 2019, we knew we had to staff up to deliver the local plan. At that point in 2019, we were doing okay in terms of with the staff we had in place, but we expected a deluge of applications coming in to basically for our local plan to be delivered, basically. Like, luckily for us, that never happened. So I think if it would have been a very different situation to now. So we did this DM review, and that was looking in terms of what essentially we needed in terms of resource. So we're very fortunate in terms of our old chief executive back in 2020. So this was before COVID, before we had the backlog. We were successful in basically getting new posts in place. So in essence, we strengthened the team probably in the region of about 30% by doing this DM review. But as you can see, whilst we created new roles, we couldn't for love of money fill the roles, and we still can't to this present day. At the current moment in time, we're still, just in terms of the planning applications team, we're still carrying 4 vacancies, whereby we've gone out for advert and we simply can't fill those kind of roles. So what we did do is when we started, obviously, when the backlog was building, we had the money from the roles, so we could buy into utilising the likes of Capita, the likes of any consultants who were coming in and helping us out. Now, I've kind of got completely mixed feelings on this. It worked in some ways because it did help to kind of shift. The problem for us was that it created a lot of work in terms of the management of them. And they worked very well in terms of householder type applications. It worked really, really well in terms of doing that. But everything else, it created sometimes more problems than it's worth. So I think that's probably a lesson learned from our perspective. It's all well and good throwing money at the issue in terms of getting that external buy-in. Personally, for me, it's much better investing within the team you've got who will be able to provide kind of moving forward. So what we did do is we got into, say, for instance, July 2021, we ramped up the allocations. And what we were doing is it was essentially just really putting very low numbers out to the officers. At that point in time, in July 2021, we had a few new officers who started in June and July. So they were completely fresh to planning. We had 2 new graduate planners who started at that point in time. One started in September, one started in June, who had no idea about planning at that point in time. So it was very difficult for them coming into this as well, incredibly difficult. However, we kind of adopted a completely different kind of style of management with it. What we tried to do as a council was really trying to basically give the officers as much breathing space and basically take the distractions away from them. And Florence will talk about this in a moment in terms of what we did from a technical perspective to kind of help scale that. So from 467 applications we had back in the July time, by the end of 2021, we didn't have a backlog per se. So we didn't have that in terms of just waiting validation. They were all with officers at that point in time, and we'd lost that 80 number in terms of waiting validation. But it obviously does take time to filter through that kind of system. So I'll just pass over to Florence now, who can talk to you a little bit about what we did in terms of a technical team.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to briefly just give you guys an insight into what we did to support the applications team, because I do think we played an important role. So we're a small closed team of experienced technicians, and we're used to validating with a good detailed local list, which obviously helps front load applications. We've always undertook consultation immediately, but during the backlog, there was a real emphasis on encouraging applicants and agents to track the applications online so they could see when they were allocated, and reviewing consultation responses. We're responsible for all of the incoming calls to the planning department, and during the backlog, we actually used a voicemail system which helped us manage our own workload. However, we still called all inquiries back, answering their queries without the involvement of officers, and only where necessary. In other words, it related to an ongoing allocated application would we take messages and pass them on to the officers, and that allowed us, the case officers, really focused time, no interruptions. We did the same for the emails to the department, utilising some auto responses, signatures where necessary. If we received amended plans within that inbox, we would keep applications moving. We'd add the plans to the online file, undertake additional consultations. So obviously when the officer was allocated it, then hopefully, consultation would have taken place, and they may well be in a position to determine it. And then finally, I think what was really, really good with the new management assistants, we rebuilt our relationship between obviously our technical team and the planning applications team. And we used a Teams group, and still do, to post questions. The questions we had were answered really quickly, which meant we got the right information for the case officer. But that also meant we could keep our caseload moving because we got the information to us quickly. But the real benefit of that Teams group meant we were all working together and we were on the same page when validating. We didn't lose that shared, experiences whilst we were all working at home. I think that covers it all, Mark.
Yeah, cheers, Flo. So in terms of lessons learned in terms of this, because there was a lot from our perspective, I think what I would say first and foremost is we had a really strong core team. We knew what could happen. It just there was motivation, and that's the critical thing with what we found. We completely lost motivation, and it was about instilling that, but kind of going through the list we've got. So allocate as soon as you can, sign off daily. That really helped us. What we did is we knew in order to get rid of the applications that we had to improve massively in terms of our throughput. So as a general rule of thumb, at the moment in time, we probably determine in the region between 25 and 35 applications a week, thereabouts. Probably for about 2 or 3 months, we were determining 75 applications a week. So that changed, that whole mindset had to change. And yes, we had some external resource come into place to help that, but that was predominantly the core nucleus of the team who was kind of doing that. It's not sustainable long term. And we were fortunate insofar as we didn't have a huge backlog. Yes, it was kind of 6 months, but the core nucleus of the team knew where they had to kind of get to with that. What we also did is we communicated really openly with our agents and third parties in terms of they knew we had a problem. We communicated that in terms of our emails. In hindsight, what would have been really useful for us to do was have something on our website really setting out in terms of how long things are going to be. And that's probably a lesson learned in terms of that. In terms of giving applicants one chance, and certainly in terms of householder applications, there is that ping pong potentially. It was really giving applicants one chance with it. Tough love kind of worked in terms of this. It was very transactional in terms of what we did, but it helped bring those numbers down. We didn't get a load of appeals. That was my major worry, because I kind of thought at one point, right, okay, if we're refusing a lot of schemes, we're going to end up in a problem in 6 to 12 months' time. That didn't happen. We got the resubmissions. In hindsight, obviously, if the resubmissions would have come in now, we'd have got a fee, which would have worked better, but we are where we are. We don't have Power BI or things like that. We utilise Access, and a little bit like Nicola said before, for us, it was about looking at the data continuously in terms of the problem. I think part of the problem is when I came in post in July 2021, I didn't realise how bad the problem was. So I think what management tried to do, and rightly so in some ways, was kind of take that away from the offices, what situation we was in. I didn't realise how kind of bad it was. So what we did is we kind of communicated really openly with the team, setting out, right, this is the problem, this is where we need to get to, and critically, this is what we need to do to get to X. And I think that kind of really, really worked for us. The team mentality was absolutely critical. Like, as I say, we were really fortunate that we had incredibly kind of really good core team, and those around it kind of chipped into that. And I can't emphasize that enough for everyone on the call. I think it's often a case where you think if you get more resource, it will help. And it will, there's no doubt about it. But if you can kind of get that team mentality in terms of that buy-in from your team, that will serve you really, really well. So we created team bubbles in order to help with this, because we had a kind of growing team. We also were working from home. It was hybrid working. We created bubbles whereby we had principal planners, plan officers, plan assistants, and graduate planners within that, so they could all try and help each other in terms of that. As I say, I've already mentioned about communicating openly and transparently. Home working is great, but it did create problems for us in terms of that management, in terms of getting the buy-in from the team, in terms of this is where we go into it. So it's got obviously pros and cons to it. And probably lastly, from our perspective, it is about hard graft. That's all it's about. And it's putting the hours in and you will get out of it, but it will take time. So that's everything from our side, Shelley.
That's great, Mark. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I'm really croaky this morning. That's fantastic. I can see that we've got some questions coming through, and we're going to just hear from Graham from Hackney, and then we'll kind of pause and take questions. And I can see already that some of the questions are around some of the issues you raised around the effectiveness of taking on agency and contractor staff, but also around new team culture. And I think that feels like that's going to be a reoccurring theme from our speakers today. So bear with me. I'm just going to do the magic of swapping people's faces round. And despite what your screen name says, Graham, you are from Hackney, and I will let you introduce yourself and tell us the story of Hackney Performance Management.
Hi, thanks, Shelley. When Shelley referred to flying by the seat of our pants, I think she mostly meant my tech issues this morning. Had some slides which were fairly rudimentary, so I'm not going to present them. I'll just talk to you instead. So I'm Graham Callum. I'm the growth team manager at Hackney, which is kind of covers a number of functions, including in relation to DM, it relates to major applications only. So not the kind of stuff where kind of your throughput and your backlog such a big issue. But my background is as a DM planner, and I managed a DM team here for 5 years, during which the team maintained a fairly limited backlog. So the full disclosure is that I'm not probably really a backlog buster. I don't think I've done any of the kind of heroic and incredible work that other people have done on the call that have kind of managed to really get authorities out of really bad positions. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about what my focus was, which was kind of about maintaining throughput. As I inherited a team that didn't have too much backlog, but I saw officers who were perhaps struggling a little bit, and I didn't think we were necessarily getting the kind of best out of the resource we had. And I thought maybe we could tweak a few things and kind of create a system that was create a team that was very stable. So I kind of looked at sort of having a bit of a change of focus with the team. I mean, I think what everyone's been saying on the call already is perhaps kind of planning's moved on a bit anyway, but I came into an environment where there was very much a focus on stat returns and getting those on target. And if the returns were fine, then everything was fine. And that sort of meant that once stuff had gone over target, perhaps it was sort of lower priority, and backlogs you run the risk there of building up backlogs. So I wanted to have a shift away from focusing on kind of stat return applications and actually just thinking about all applications and kind of whatever its determination date is, just work to that rather than prioritizing one type of application ahead of another. And also looking to try and minimize withdrawals and EOTs wherever possible, and sort of trying to impose a system where officers need to have a sort of good justification for extension of time on anything. And the objectives there were just to keep that consistent and manageable workload at all time, to have officers with kind of lower overall numbers in their caseload to make life a bit easier for everybody, and just to kind of try and avoid getting into crisis management scenarios, which is all well and fine. I'm sure we can all aspire to that, but sort of how does it happen? What changes can we make to get to that point? And I suppose the first thing to say is it's not stuff that you can really change overnight. I think what we did was impose lots of little things and try to be consistent with them and kind of build step by step to get into a better position than trying to do any kind of radical overhaul, which is obviously sort of what we've heard about already, is kind of radical overhaul in a crisis scenario. So this is sort of slightly different. And I suppose it's sort of really important to point out that it's never going to be perfect. If you're throughputing thousands of planning applications with the best will in the world, you're not going to have kind of processes that work perfectly every time. But I think the thing that was really helpful is when things did start to go a little bit awry, we just tried to really stick to the plan and stick to our ways of working rather than kind of falling back on stuff that seems like the perfect answer to a sort of application scenario in that moment. In terms of the changes that we tried to make, it sort of was primarily about front loading, trying to really kind of get on the front foot with planning applications. So things that we tried to do was sort of increase emphasis on really good pre-app processes, kind of try and get really thorough pre-app and focus on getting in a good time, so that kind of with kind of tricky agents, and I'm sure we can all think straight away, as I said, tricky agents, probably half the people on the call would have imagined somebody that they see 200 times a year. If you've got a good pre-app process, they can't argue against using it, and you're front loading your work outside of that kind of stressful fixed application window where there's all the kind of regulatory process stuff to go through. The next part of it was just encouraging really, really thorough vetting of application. I think it's a really good time investment to do that, to spend a lot of time on vetting. Might be a bit of an outlier opinion on this, but I have a strong preference for planning officers doing it. At Hackney, it's primarily officers that do the vetting. We've had spells with our support team doing it. And the reason my preference is that is because you should expect your planning officer to look at the file in full and check everything that would be done at the vetting stage anyway. So why not kind of, as an efficiency measure, ask your officer to do that work themselves anyway. The other ask I had of my team was that an expectation that from the first time that they vet their applications, because the ask is for them to do it thoroughly, that the expectation that they would have an opinion and anticipate actions that they would be looking for through the course of the application. So start doing your planning assessment from the very first time you look at it, and you'd have an officer where perhaps your ask of them is to sort of, from the very first time you've looked at this, perhaps you think, well, this proposal's probably going to be okay. I'll likely need to ask for this change, or I need to check this thing on site, or this consultee will be my priority on this application. Just asking officers to kind of think about that from the very outset, so that they're kind of, from the first time they look at the application, they're starting to kind of map ahead the way that they're working. And then the other thing we did was try and shift internal targets away from the statutory expiry dates. The important thing with that was to do it in a kind of very measured way. We didn't really get very far, so we started off asking that applications be kind of written up and ready to go by the end of the day on which they expire. The end of the day before they expire, which just gives you the full expiry date, that if there's any kind of tricky issue, you're not doing that first call to an agent at 5 p.m. I'm sure we've all been there and suffered that experience. We didn't get very far beyond there, but actually that, I think, was enough. Lots of stuff did come earlier than a day before, but even just the day before, it just takes a bit of pressure off. We introduced an increased focus on monitoring, and monitored stuff that's not really necessarily in your kind of standard planning database stuff. So kind of actually kept records of when stuff was coming kind of the day before as expected, and also a record of reports that required kind of significant changes to them or kind of overturned. So you've got something that you can use to help people with their longer term development, that's not kind of done on a sort of last second as you make your decision basis, where sort of people, your sort of team's development it's not a good time for it when it's kind of, you're sort of desperately trying to get decisions out, but you've got some evidence base there. And so sort of fed that into people's appraisals and their development plans. But I felt it was really important to be diligent with that. As I said at the top, don't let that slide as much as it seems like an extra task. I think we found it really helpful to have that there. So you could monitor spikes in work, and you could see where people were struggling and perhaps be a little bit ahead of the curve on what might be about to go wrong. And then something else we did, and this is quite hard work, but when new staff came in, we tried really hard not to allocate them backlog. If you've got new staff coming in, especially really junior people, and that sort of classic experience, it's their first day and they have a quick look and their email goes live and you've got an application expiring that day, and then you're allocated 50 backlog cases, it's going to be really hard for that person to ever get on top. So a bit of kind of, as people depart, a bit of management of that. We always ask people to focus actually on clearing their backlog, because the live stuff's sort of a bit easier to hand over to someone else and for it to be unpicked. So all those things sort of, I think on the face of it, add a bit more work here and there, and I don't suppose anyone listening to this is thinking, I've got a load of spare capacity to use up. So there's something has to give to get to there. So I think what we looked at was sort of trying to strategize work and project manage and make marginal gains. And people who've worked with me or listened to me talk about work are probably sick of hearing me talk about marginal gains. But something to bear in mind is, if you've got 3,000 applications a year, if you can save 10 minutes on each application throughout the process, that's the equivalent of 70 working days, or a third of a case officer's annual work, just by saving 10 minutes. And it's probably quite easily done. So in terms of sort of things that might get you there and things we try to do, if you can make decisions quicker, you can cut down on your correspondence. I think every planning agent and applicant in the country is probably going to ask at the start of the last week what's happening with their planning application. Well, if you can just issue them a decision, you've saved yourself a few minutes writing an email. And it seems silly, but I'll go back to your 3,000 of those a year or whatever it is for your authority. And something else is to kind of strategize and think about how and when to engage with applicants. I think if you need to seek revisions to a planning application, you might be really on the ball and you might be in a position to ask for those on week 2. Well, most agents will then probably spend the next 5 weeks arguing about whether or not they need it. So perhaps week 6 is the sweet spot to ask for that. And you can kind of apply that to every bit of correspondence you have. When do you chase your consultees? How do you do it? What little tricks and measures you put in place just to kind of really strategize how you engage with sort of everyone, all your stakeholders. I mentioned really careful vetting. Obviously, the marginal gain benefit of that is that you're going to avoid errors during the process, which are really time consuming, financially costly, and also kind of sometimes necessitate stuff going over target, and you get into that kind of difficult to manage situation with applications. And then template everything. Obviously, I'm sure everyone here's got template reports, but why not template the emails you send that ask for revisions more? So, every single last thing you think you can template. It's probably a project management one, this, but sort of pushing back on new ask. I think the classic example of that is sort of off the back of judicial review and appeal stuff. Kind of legal services will have a tendency to ask for more in reports, and that's all well and fine, but 10 minutes have gone the other way if you just say yes to it without thinking about whether it is the right thing to do. So kind of always, we would always think about, well, what's this new ask, no matter how small, what's its kind of overall cost to us as a service and a team, and can we actually accommodate it? And then next, I'm not practicing what I preach here because I'm not the best with IT, but really make best use of IT. I was always really mindful that the planning systems we've used can probably do more than we've done with them. I'm sure plenty of people listening here will be in a much better position, but is there something that can be done with the IT that makes a marginal gain? If there is, it's worth doing. And then I touched on pre-apps, but kind of we always sought to get double bubble from them. If I saw a pre-app report that didn't look suspiciously like a planning application report, I thought people could probably be working a bit smarter. And then finally, this one, people might have different opinions on this, but really try to cut back on amends to officer reports. I've certainly been in scenarios as a case officer where I've seen quite a lot of red penning of reports, and managers and team leaders who perhaps sought kind of lots and lots of very minor changes, perhaps from a sign-off point of view, think, is this going to be sort of robust in the face of an appeal or legal challenge? If it is, then it's probably good to go. And there's an element of risk involved in that, I suppose, that if you're kind of sailing close to the wind, but are you going to try and correct something 1,000 times, or are you going to risk there perhaps being a kind of noises about a legal challenge on one? These sort of, just in terms of a kind of project management and marginal gains point of view, my view is you have to take a bit of a risk sometimes. But then that's not to say that you shouldn't look at reports. It was more about kind of taking issues that we'd see with individual officer reports and turning it into sort of a development issue rather than working on it as a case by case matter. All of that, I think, sort of on first read from an officer's perspective isn't very appealing, and you're not going to, and we didn't manage to achieve any of this without kind of a bit of culture shift and getting buy-in, and I think it's the really critical part. It's really, really important to have the team on board, and the benefits of that is if you have people that are kind of happy with the way they work and they're on board, you actually reduce your staff turnover, and staff turnover as often as has already been touched on is a really big problem when it comes to kind of backlogs suddenly appearing from nowhere. But how to do it's tricky, but I suppose it's about kind of convincing people over time. If you can make a small change that quickly makes a little difference, I think people sit up and listen to what you've got to say and will perhaps kind of acknowledge the way you want to work. And I think sort of selling what you're trying to achieve to people is really important, like really good communication with all your team that, hey, I've got an ask of you, but this is what I think the win is. And, you can point to the kind of bits that people don't like, no one likes phoning an agent to tell them their application's not going. So, hey, if we do this extra bit here, you might not have to do that bit. And just use that evidence, kind of show kind of diminishing or regularly low kind of backlogs and time, and you can tell people about kind of the positive cycle that you're creating, and that if you kind of keep on board with this, we're all going to be in a really good position. But I think it's really important to appeal to individual preferences in your teams as well. I think everyone will have an officer in their team who's sort of very driven and career focused, which is fantastic. If you're creating a way of working that's giving them more headspace, then their opportunities to develop are really there. Possibly also got someone in your team who's just happy to plod along and wants the easy life, and they've got other focus outside planning, which is absolutely fine. Perhaps the sell to that person is that, well, this just, this gives you that, this keeps you're not in the off, you're not still in the office at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock on a Friday evening. So that, you can sell it to people's individual preferences, and then finally just be really consistent if you're making a change to the way you're working, I think that it's probably important for your team that you stick with that and get there. So yeah, thanks ever so much for listening to me. Really appreciate your time. This stems basically from a pub rant that people have heard over and over. So hopefully it's turned into something vaguely more structured, and there's something in there that people find helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. And you make such a good point about kind of consistency as well of approach when bringing new things in. The work that we do at PAS when we talk to councils, particularly around the sort of trend of bringing in kind of one chance amendments during in-app negotiations, or amendments that might be more structured. That's been the biggest challenge, kind of bringing in that consistency. Some officers are really on board and are like, yep, you have one set of amended plans during the course of the application, no more. But you then have multiple officers in the same team going, yeah, but I like to kind of tweak it as much as I can and get it to the best place. So it is, about kind of getting everyone to kind of buy into those changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I'm going to bring Nicola and Mark back on screen, because we've had some questions come through on Slido. Pete's been doing an absolutely amazing job of categorizing them for me. So we've had some questions come through that are for individual speakers about what you've talked about and your kind of team setup, and then we've had some more kind of general questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the ones particularly about your presentations first. And Nicola, you've got 3 questions about Croydon. So the first question is, what programme or system do you use to produce your data managing performance? You showed some very interesting tables. So how are you creating those?
As I said at the start of my presentation, it's nothing radical. So we use Uniform, and I'm afraid we still use Access to pull out a lot of that data. We are starting to dip the toe into the Power BI, but we're not using it yet. So it's Access, and I have to say it's not even me. I have an officer who produces those reports for me, so they're in my inbox every Monday morning. But yeah, it's Uniform and Access.
No, I think that's fine. Every department I know has got a spreadsheet or Access geek who is all over the generation of reports and tables. So yeah. And then your second question is, in phase 2, how did you implement a new team culture? Because embedding habits must be a tough challenge.
Yeah, so I think it has been a whole progress. I think when we did phase 1, we had lots of team meetings. We were saying it's not about working harder, it's about working differently, it's about helping each other out. And we were very much helped in phase 1 about the fact we were really coming back to the office post-lockdown. So actually everybody was quite excited to see each other. So that actually helped us. I think in shifting to phase 2 was quite difficult. And also the delay to the planning skills and delivery fund allocation was difficult, because I wrote those objectives in August, and at Christmas I was saying to some of my managers, it's going back up again, nobody is listening to me. And I remember one of my managers saying to me at the time, look, in January you can be as irritating as you like about this and we'll do it, but until then we're doing something else. And it very much was sort of single-mindedness, I guess, on my part, and really banging the drum. I say some of the team were on with it very quickly. They saw the benefit of the fact they were no longer being chased, as Graham says, several times a week about that very old application, if you can take that out of the process. And we've probably done the easy wins now. So what was in the backlog, we've done the easy wins. What's there now are some very icky and sticky enforcement related cases that we still need to deal with. But yeah, it's been very much, we have quite a strong team focus. I have 3 area teams within development management and a planning enforcement team. They have quite strong team meetings where that message is reiterated and discussed. And I always take the approach that it's a good idea no matter whose idea it is. So if somebody in the team's got a great idea as to how we solve some of these things, we will roll it out.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about how phase 3 gets implemented. So what are some of the root causes for the really sticky stuff that's still left in the system? That's going to be super interesting. I suspect legal and highways. If I was
legal and enforcement, as
Yeah.
Graham says, I'll let you know that one in the pub at some point.
That's great. And then the third question specifically with Croydon was how many DM case officers you have in Croydon, and has that remained consistent during the tricky period? And I don't know whether they mean tricky period as in the 114 notice or also the kind of phases of backlog work.
So certainly in the 114 notice, all of our contractors, I'm ashamed to say, were dismissed overnight, and we lost 5. One Thursday morning we had them, and by Friday morning we'd had to let them go. 3 weeks later we got 3 of them back, which shows that salami slicing isn't the answer. We spent 3 weeks lobbying as to why we needed them back. Probably in phase 2 and 3, yes, our officers have remained quite consistent. We have 3 area teams. We're quite a big department, so we have about 30 planning officers and probably about 9 managers on top of that, all doing different types of work. So we are quite a big team, getting the region of 4,500 applications a year. That's dipped from about 5,000, and we have quite a strong pre-app process as well. But at the height of phase 1, officers had over 100 applications each, which just wasn't manageable.
Great. And so moving on to Mark and Florence at Lancaster, one of the questions is, did you enforce office days to improve the team ethic? And there are some more general questions around what the people on the call think about the benefits and disbenefits of kind of home working versus being all together in the office.
Yeah, we did. We basically, but it was very difficult, a really difficult backdrop for us, because our chief exec was very much work at home. We don't really need you in the office. So, boys, my view on it at the time was we had a lot of people who fresh from university who had no idea about planning. And I put myself in their shoes thinking, am I going to be able to learn remotely? And I just didn't think you could. So we had it at one point whereby it was between 2 and 3 days a week. And that was very difficult to get people back. So this was back in July 2021, whereby it was hard. People were obviously concerned about COVID. People were used to working at home for over a period of time. There was a lot of resistance to change from it. And there was a lot of, it felt often like it was falling on deaf ears, and it was myself kind of banging this drum. So yeah, that's kind of what we did in terms of that.
No, that's really good. I mean, did Graham and Nicola, do you want to kind of chip in on that work balance of work from home, being in the office? How does that work in both of your teams?
Shall I go first? So
Sure.
We have a corporate hybrid working policy which requires officers to be in the office 2 days a week. But if you walk around our floor, you'll see that the area which is inhabited the most is by the DM and by the policy team. I myself, I'm in 99% of the time. I'm here nearly every day of the week. I find my job easier from the office when I can hear at least 50% of what's going on phone calls. But yeah, most of our officers are in at least 2 days a week, and often more. But I think that helps create that team environment. And as Mike said, we had lots of new starters during COVID who don't only ever work from home, and you can't just turn to the person next to you and say, what am I doing wrong? Why doesn't this work?
Yeah, Hackney has the same approach. That corporately, the line on Hackney is it's a place-based organisation, so they want people to be in across the authority doing their jobs. But yeah, so they have a kind of 2 day a week ask, sort of subject to service areas kind of final say on how it works. But yeah, we see a lot of DM and enforcement doing a lot more than that. I think we're pretty lucky and have been kind of in a London area where lots of our team are really local, quite a young DM service. So I think a lot of our DM planners like the social side of it, and it's been really helpful, kind of people coming back in post-pandemic.
Yeah. Right. So Graham, you've also got two questions come through on the chat for you as well. Somebody asking, what is your average caseload per officer for householders and minors, and how have you managed to keep that manageable and not adding to the backlog?
Honestly, my answer to that question is I don't know now, because I've sort of pivoted away into a different role that's mostly on majors. And thinking back, we had it at times I was managing in DM, it was probably kind of the peak years. So we were probably up and around kind of 4,500, maybe a bit less, sort of 4,000 to 4,500, including all the kind of bits and bobs, kind of approval of details, prior approvals and stuff like that. So sorry, I've not got a more precise answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And then the second question, which I love whoever's put it anonymously. Can you please repeat the little nugget about how much time can be saved in total by saving 10 minutes on an application, and that they loved that, and I think they're going to pinch it and use it.
I'm worried that someone's maybe done the maths and I'm about to get called out on this. So if it was 10 minutes, 10 minutes per app, and you had 3,000 apps a year, it's 70 working days if you do a 36-hour working week, which would be, including kind of annual leave and so on, is about a third of an officer's. Or if you're saving those 10 minutes as a manager signing off all those apps, that's a third of your working year. In answer to the first question, a colleague who's actually listening on the call's got me the answer. Officers are carrying between 50 and 80 apps at the moment.
Yeah, okay, that segues on quite nicely. So there are a number of questions in the chat that they're asking Paz for some information. So Peter, are you happy for me to bring you onto screen as well, and we can have a look at some of these questions?
Yeah, sure.
One question is the question I think we get asked on a daily basis, which is, what is the magic number of the average number of applications for an officer, a mixed caseload for a general planning officer? There is no magic number, I think. I think there are 309 different local planning authorities, and they're all so different in scale, geography, and issues. I don't think we really have a perfect number. I mean, we hear sort of averages of around 35, but then we also hear averages of around 70 to 90. So it feels like we're dodging the question, but I'm not sure we can answer it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, typical politician speaking. I think, it is really difficult, and people do, as Shelley says, often ask us this question. But the reason why it's so difficult is because it depends how your department is set up. So, some councils, the case officer will do the validation, and obviously, if you're doing a validation on top of the, term the application, obviously that's more time. And other councils have dedicated validation teams. In the same way, appeals, where you've got an appeals officer. It's also the type of applications you receive. Normally, if you're a very pro-growth authority, you might not have quite so many objections received, so therefore it may not take you quite so long to wade through all the applications. So there was a benchmark that came out a while back of the average council with the average caseload of 40 per officer. That was banded around a few years ago. So I suppose if you wanted a number, that's probably the best number we can give you. But it's so full of caveats, and also the other thing is what do you include? Are you including everything? Condition discharge, pre-apps, prior approvals, or are you just doing the PS1, PS2 return applications? So it's really difficult. Paz has done, we do a productivity and resource piece of work where we can try and work out what we think is your personal council's average based on all the data you give us. But I think certainly if you're getting caseloads over 50, then you're probably struggling, I suppose. But many councils have a lot higher. So yeah, sorry, that's not really giving an answer. That's probably the best we can do.
I always wheel out the anecdote of one particular case officer I came into contact with who had a caseload of 292. And it was because two members of his area team had left, and someone had just gone into iDocs and changed all of their cases to his initials. And I think he was having a little bit of a cry of like, where do you start if you've got 292 applications with your initials against them on the system? But I happily stand corrected if anyone else has got a higher caseload than that, but I've not come across one. So the second question for Paz is, what is the definition of a backlog application? And this is something that me and Pete have talked about on a daily basis, I think, over the course of the year, but also have had conversations with DLUC and local authorities around. So the Planning Skills Delivery Fund that was available for local authorities to kind of bid for money for backlog projects effectively categorised it as what was in your PS1 and 2 returns from a fixed point in time now and 5 years ago, which, that's some numbers. But I think the sort of honest answer is there's no real set definitive definition of what is backlog, and what is backlog for some authorities will be different to others. We're aware of an authority that got backlog funding because their backlog was 10, but it was 10 applications on big strategic sites that needed particular specialisms being brought in to kind of unblock. So there isn't really a kind of set definition. Lots of authorities categorise it as the number of applications on hand. Some say the number of applications on hand that have gone over time. Some say, well, it's the number of applications we've got that have been validated but not yet allocated. For some authorities, it's the large volumes of discharge of condition applications or other conditions that sit sort of outside of the PS1 and 2 data returns. So there isn't a set definition, but I think it's kind of whatever is the backlog that's applicable to you and your circumstances, which might be very different. And we've been talking to government and talking to DLUC around, would a set definition of what constitutes backlog be helpful? Would that help councils kind of plan for case management better, particularly if extensions of time or other kind of different performance measures come in? So I don't think we've got a definitive answer, have we, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And but there is actually, if you haven't already, the DLUC have got a very useful dashboard on their website now, which is great to play around with. And they do have the applications in hand against applications determined, as in against applications received. And if you play around with that and have a look at your own authority, where you want to get to is a measure of one, i.e. you're getting the same number of applications received as you are determining. So you see, you're basically managing your caseload. And I find that quite a useful tool when I go into councils to see how much of a problem, it's not necessarily the number of your backlog, but how are you coping with the numbers that you're receiving, and whether your staff are actually getting through the workload. So that's quite
it's the kind of ratio, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
It's a ratio,
I mean,
exactly.
I think as a rule of thumb, when we were talking to councils around bidding for the backlog money, we kind of said, if you've got more than 15% on hand of the total number of applications you receive in a year, that's probably a kind of manageable backlog. But if you're kind of over that, then you should probably think about kind of applying for the money. So that was very kind of finger in the wind maths rather than anything more data driven, such as the ratio. So we've got two more questions. Peter, one of which is from Colin from Brent, asking, have we got any insights on when national development management policies might see the light of day?
Well, I don't know. We understand that they have been worked on, and we understand that there probably is a draft somewhere in the civil service somewhere. But obviously, because of the new government, we don't know yet what. I mean, Labour are saying they're going to produce a new MPPF, revised MPPF, by the end of this month, and the idea was the National Development Management policies would form part of the MPPF. So whether they'll magically appear, who knows? I suspect not. So I know that they have been working on it. Civil servants at DLUP for quite a while. I don't think we know, as I said, certainly before the election, I think they were getting to a point where they might have been revealed very shortly, but whether they'll now be reflected on with the new government in place, I think we're still to find out. So if we hear anything and we're able to tell you, we will do.
Yeah, that's a very diplomatic answer. I mean, for those on the call that missed it, Rachel Reeves yesterday, in her speech, said that we will have a new MPPF by the end of the month, and also a written ministerial statement to local planning authorities to I think effectively say kind of get on board with the growth agenda. I suspect any new MPPF might be more geared towards other Labour signalling around mandatory housing targets and grey belt, but there is always a possibility it will include development management policies and be that kind of splitting out that was signalled last year. And then the last question is, have we received any word on the Richards review of statutory consultees? And I think I can answer that in that no, we haven't. We've not heard anything more than anybody else on the call on that front. But again, if we do, I'm sure we'll be telling as many people as we can far and wide when we do. Great. So that's all the questions we've got for the moment. We've got lots and lots of other general questions that are coming, but I'm conscious we've got 2 local authorities left to speak, and then it would be really nice to kind of bring everybody back at the end for a wider discussion. So I'm just going to switch everybody round and bring onto screen Sarah, and we can guess where you're from your lovely screen at the back from St Albans City and District Council. So Sarah, over to you.
Morning, everybody. I think some of what I might be saying will resonate with what has already been said with some of the authorities, but hopefully I will add value and provide some additional insights. So I've been development manager at St Albans in 2 stints since 2019 to the end of 2021, and then I returned in 2022, and I'm currently development manager for the next 2 weeks. So I have a full sense of what our backlog was, and I think that's really important to know what caused it. So we basically in 21-22 lost half of our DM team over a 10-month period. We had quite a lot of planners and we still do have quite a lot of planners who join at the same time, and therefore are on a sort of similar trajectory. We are just outside the M25 with very close trains to London. It takes 22 minutes to get from St Albans to St Pancras on the Thames Link. So we lose staff to London authorities, London private sector, and we also lose to Bucks who have performance related pay. So yeah, we struggle once we've lost to experienced planners like everybody else, we have to grow our own and start from the beginning. We also have a very decrepit IT system, which didn't cope well in COVID, but that's not really the primary cause of the backlog. The primary cause of the backlog was that we didn't have enough people to deliver the work. And we particularly lost the skills gap in the middle with the complex householders and the miners. And anything with non-standard constraints, so Greenbelt and heritage. Yes, we had a tricky time, which we are still just coming out of now. Our initial response was to allocate things in date order, and that's not something I would recommend. We also have strong minimum targets, so I can tell you what I think a caseload should be based on type, and I've got that on a spreadsheet because I use it as my resourcing model. I've got that on a slide later. But we kept applications in a holding pen to avoid unmanageable caseloads. We did try temporary contractor resource, but we only retained contractors who were good, to the point where we had some come and go in the space of 8 weeks. So I've always taken an approach to not give false hope to agents, to not give false hope to councillors, to not give false hope to customers. If the agency staff aren't good, they don't stay here, unfortunately. We also took away our amendment service. So we have a clear amendment policy, which is well published, which I've also got on the slides. But we took away our amendment service, and we basically took an approach to determine on the basis of submission, refuse for lack of information if needed, refuse something that could have been easily amended. And the initial approach was also only to give access to officers 4 hours a week on the phones, which is still retained now, to be honest. And we've trained our agents. So I'm not sure that that's something we'll ever go back to, having, a sort of throughout the week kind of response. Officers can call agents outside of that 4 hour period if they want to negotiate and things, but it's just about limiting the contact time for the customers. And they also don't take calls that aren't about their applications, so we don't take general queries, and they only should be discussing their cases on the phone. So one of the big things I did when I came back was I took the role of the liaison for the development management service with the agents. So one of the first things I did after coming back was to set up an agents forum with them. I knew from my local network that there was a lot of rumour mongering going on within the agents group. So there was a lot of sort of saying that some people were getting preferential treatment over others, and there was a lot of unhappiness. They were all winding each other up, kind of like a parents' WhatsApp group if you're a parent with a child in school. So I was quite keen to shut that down. I was also quite keen to keep my team, who were a lot of new permanent staff who we were trying to upskill and train and get on board. I was quite keen to keep them away from agents being difficult, being challenging. And so I set up the agents forum to primarily bust the myths that some people were getting priority treatment, and also ask them what would be helpful in terms of them managing their clients. St Albans is a very city. If people work in the city, people perform well. People in the private sector throw money at the problem if they need to get performance right. So they couldn't understand why the 8 week target wasn't being met. And so we set out to publish what our average, we took a PIMS approach, if you like, of publishing what our average timescale by application type was, so that people then stopped sort of thinking, well, I've got to 8 weeks, why haven't I got my decision? And started to see that actually there was a much longer trajectory ahead of them. They were also very unhappy that the fact that the amendment service had been taken away from them, particularly because they felt that if something's been in the system longer, they should be getting an approval first time. So I agreed with them that we would reintroduce that service in June last year with a chargeable amendment service. And they were actually very keen to have that adopted because they felt that people would pay. I did it as a flat fee, so it's only 200 plus VAT. And it has absolutely, it has smashed the income target I set for it, and it has supplemented the fact that our pre-app service has been through the floor. So it's been really popular. We will have to revisit that if the extensions of time go. It is something that I know is potentially on borrowed time, but we will look at our pre-app services again then and adapt if and when that comes in. And our amendment policy is quite strict, and we put it on the website and we put it on the validation letters. So we basically tell people that basically small tweaks that will make a scheme acceptable will be accepted. But you know, if it's unacceptable in principle, or you know, it requires further consultation, we will refuse without negotiation. And some of that is anything that relates to the lead local flood authority or the highway authority will get stuck in, and to be honest, ecology as well will get stuck in consultation no man's land if you try to accept amendments. So we've been very clear on that, and we've been very clear that delays are not an excuse for departing from the approach, to the point, yes, sometimes you get withdrawals and resubmissions, but then, and that doesn't solve the problem, but I suppose it stops you having to write a report that is a refusal of something that might take a lot of time. So my resourcing model, this is the spreadsheet I use, and I give it to the management team. You can see on the left hand side is my establishment, and the right hand side is the third column is the number of people I've got in post. You can see in the fourth column, that's the expected number of apps I expect somebody to deal with a week. So the graduate planning officers who are just dealing with simple householders and certificates, I expect 7 decisions a week as a minimum. Then as the complexity goes up and there is a series of applications attached to each post, then the number goes down. So my team, as it stands at the moment, their output should be a minimum of 56 a week. Actually, last week it was 60 a week, 60, and it far exceeds demand at the moment, so that we're cutting off on the backlog. But so I've calculated basically anything that is over that capacity of 56 a week times 8, which I think the capacity is 514 at the minute in my service based on current staffing. Anything over 514 I've categorised as backlog. So we've got 607 live cases at the moment. So our backlog has come down significantly from where it was. But that's how I would define backlog, and that's how I'm monitoring it. And this is my backlog monitoring spreadsheet. So you can see it's 607 now, but I look at the total number on hand each week, the total number expired, that there's work still to do there, the total number of cases awaiting allocation, which has come down significantly. We had 500 at its height, and it's now down to 40 this week. And then the total number of cases we've got allocated, obviously I want to see that number going down as well, because I do want officers' caseloads to go down slightly, although none of them have got significantly unmanageable caseloads, because we've always been allocating to their minimum target. And then I look at the number of decisions issued, the number of cases validated, and then when you take the total number on hand against the capacity, then you've got your backlog. And that's been a quick way of showing the management team that things are getting better week on week. I've also had councillors really closely involved with the service throughout this process, so that they knew what approach we were taking and how to help us manage customers as well if needed. So that's been really helpful. But I won't say it hasn't been without one difficult year of me managing agents, which hasn't always been fun. I would just say with the agents as well that we have done the tough love approach, where I've called them out for bad behaviour, and I've made it clear to them that if they bully my officers, they're potentially going to cause another exodus, which means that this will happen again. So I have individually gone to agents and said, your behaviour is unreasonable, and my staff have seen me do that as well. So by being this liaison officer, I have absolutely been able to demonstrate to the team that we do what we say we do, and they have their manager's support from that, and they don't mess me around in the same way that they mess the junior officers around. And so I have sort of stamped out the poor behaviour that officers sometimes have. We also had one other internal process in place, which I've had in place since 2019. I've got 6 officers, 7 including me, who have delegated authority to sign off decisions, and only 1 officer signs off a decision. So we had quite a lot of inconsistency around refusals and appeal performance. So when I first became development manager, I set up a weekly old-fashioned, if you like, if you're old enough to remember, delegated meeting, but it only applies to refusals. It happens every Monday. Officers come in and present cases that they think might be a refusal, and the team who happen to be around, but generally there's at least 3 or 4 of us, agree whether it's a refusal or not. It then goes on the refusal spreadsheet, so it's quicker to sign off a refusal because we know what we agreed and why. And it also means that the officer can go back to the agent and say, no, this has been to the internal refusals meeting and you have manager agreement that this is going to be refused. And so, and there is no opportunity to amend. So there is a sort of internal process that our agents know that there is scrutiny, and it gives the confidence to the officers to say, actually, no, this isn't just me that's saying it. It's the managers in the DM service. And we found that really helpful. Also, in terms of monitoring, we've used a crystal ball spreadsheet, which is brilliant. We are getting better with our extensions of time. I've just asked for the Q2 data just to see what it looks like, because we are designated, and so they're very keen to get us out of non-major designation. Where it got to at the worst, so other authorities on the call have made me feel much better. We got to 500 applications awaiting allocation, and that was a 15-week delay to the service. So it's a lot better where we were. What we did in November 23, we got PAS in, and Pete and Liz Hobden came to us and were fantastic, did a fantastic day with my team. They were also really motivated and really willing to engage with that. And actually it told us that a lot of what we do well, notwithstanding the rubbish IT system. I think that did come up in the report. But they knew that actually our processes were really good, but we had to do something exceptional to get rid of our backlog. And that's when we started triaging cases to get the quick wins through the system faster. We told the agents that was what we were going to do. And we explained to them why we were going to do it. We put another set of rules on our website as to how we were going to allocate, so that they could point to that to their customers. And people started to see a change. And without any additional resource, we took 200 cases off our backlog, even whilst we were waiting for the PSDF funding to come through. Would have been nice if DLAC had done that slightly faster, just saying. And then what we did with the backlog fund, we got the maximum of 100 grand because we had quite a lot in the system. So we did have overtime. I wouldn't say it was particularly successful other than for one part-time officer who did extra work on her non-working days. I think my team was so exhausted. It was been hard, but we did get extra help from one of the DM planners who'd moved over to policy, and he helped with sign off. I have really good relationships with a couple of other authorities in Hertfordshire, and I'd clocked that my minors' applications were going down, and therefore other authorities who didn't have a backlog might have capacity. And North Herts very kindly lent me 2 of their DM officers for 2 days a week at a very reasonable rate. And they are just finishing up now. I'm not allowed to keep them for 6 months. Apparently North Herts do want them back. So I've had 4 months of them, and they have been amazing. And they've just ploughed through some work. I also poached an agency planner who I had worked with before in Kent. So I got somebody I knew, and I wasn't going to take any sort of agency resource that I didn't already know could deliver. So I have somebody till the end of September still working through, which will hopefully get us into a much better position. My aim is we've had Mondrem working with us. I don't know if anybody has come across Mondrem, but they're a non-profit who look at increasing productivity. They look at your processes. They do a similar thing to what PAS do, but they have a bit of technology and a bit of number modelling that shows you, if you carry on at this rate and you put some measures in place, this is where you can get to. And they always recommend having 5 weeks work on hand as having capacity in the system. So that's where I'd like the service to get to. What have we learned? As I said, overtime was really challenging. When your team's already exhausted and already a little bit fed up, it is really hard to ask them to do any more. So I wouldn't say that was a huge success. I can't recommend enough taking on people you know and people who are good, and borrowing from other people. We were going to borrow from Watford originally, but their staffing changed overnight. And I suppose that's the one thing I would say is all of this all this performance hinges on stability in the DM service. And it does worry me that they think they're going to find 300 more planners. I think I read yesterday. Where they're finding those from, I don't know. And when I see those sort of super squad ads go out, I do die slightly, because I think there's a kudos to working for central government, and I worry that I'll lose some people to there. But the other thing we did with the PSDF is we put a load of flexibility in it. So I costed up a series of options, which were agency, capacity contract, using overtime, potentially resourcing, borrowing the surveyors from the corporate project team and repurposing them because they only had to read plans. I had a load of options in there, which meant that I never had to go back to DLUC and say, actually, can we use it for this rather than that, which I've had to do with other funds. So I kept it loose and I kept it flexible. The things to consider, we've got a load of templates. We've templated everything, so that what Hackney said resonated with me. I've got templates for everything, even a holding email, so that officers don't have to write anything. But what I would say now is that the tick box reports and focusing on getting things out as fast as possible has hampered some of my officer learning, and we're having to put additional support in place to improve understanding and develop judgment. So just beware that if you go to tick box, you kind of lose the nuance of understanding the shades of grey that is planning. Our appeal work is all still out-resourced for the complex appeals, and so, you know, that's still really expensive, and my team don't get to do it, or they get to do the legwork stuff but not the appeal itself. I think the pre-app meetings being suspended means that there is definitely a loss of, there's definitely an email culture at St Albans, and it needs to move away to being more of a, you know, planner communication culture, and that's something that if I were staying, I'm leaving at the end of next week to another role, and that's something I'd be working towards, and the senior team I've got in place are aware of that. I do think there's a bit of a mindset that if things are always expired and you can't do much with it, so I am having to work very hard on the 26 weeks to 16-week sort of dates, like Nicola mentioned, and we are having to reframe the mindset to get it done. And, you know, I think it's amazing. I think EOTs only came in when I was on maternity leave, possibly the first time. So let's say 2011, 2012, but I had a baby, so forgive me. You know, actually, before then, all applications got dealt with in 8 weeks. And, you know, I do think there's probably a resetting across the industry that it is possible. And I think just the thing I've been very aware of is that I've taken a lot of the pressure, and I've dealt with a lot of the complaints and a lot of the angst and a lot of the shouting, but it hasn't just been me. And I am aware that some of my junior staff deal with it, but also I've got 6 very dedicated, very loyal team leaders and deputy team leaders who also need a bit of a break. And so we have definitely shared the load in terms of the angst, and that's been really important. I think that's it from me.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really good. And can I just say, I absolutely love the fact that you've been really visible in leadership, and that your teams have kind of seen that you've been taking the brunt for them, and also that they can see through the refusal kind of critical discussion. That's absolutely fantastic for junior staff. I love that. It's brilliant.
Thanks.
Great. So we are now going to hear from Helen and Sarah from Trafford, and then we're going to have time at the end to kind of go through some more questions. So over to you. I can see you getting the slides ready.
Great. Can you see everything okay?
Yeah, we can see it great.
Thank you. So I'm Helen Milner, and I'm joined by Sarah Lowes, and we are the area and majors team leaders within Trafford. So Trafford Council is a borough in the south of Greater Manchester, characterised by large areas of kind of suburban housing. From north to south, it just gets more spacious and more affluent. So we have a very affluent demographic, which has led to a very high demand for development, specifically householder development. So pre-COVID, We did have a good performance in terms of PS2 returns, but this kind of hid a bit of a culture of high reliance on EOTs. The department always carried quite a sizable backlog, and that was just down to kind of working culture and ways of working. I think somebody else mentioned before there was a lot of ping-ponging on applications. There was always this kind of continuous kind of negotiations. But we were starting to look at efficiencies and how we could improve the performance to stay within those statutory time limits. We'd switched to Paperlite. We were holding kind of consultee surgeries in the department. We'd have our consultees coming in so officers could meet face to face to go through applications. And we were, as a department, maintaining kind of a full complement of our staffing level, which was helpful. However, when the pandemic hit, we did face problems, as I think everyone did. We were able to switch to home working very quickly because everybody had laptops and remote working facilities. However, a lot of our officers were redeployed throughout the council and public health, and we also had a lot of IT challenges. Unfortunately, uniform, struggle to work from home for a lot of officers, and also we have a high number of officers who had childcare demands. On top of that, we saw quite a significant increase in the number of householder applications and the complexity of those applications. So people were asking, putting in applications for much larger extensions, more complex applications than we'd had before. And what we were then seeing was we were leading to a huge rise in objections. Everybody was suddenly reading those neighbour notification letters they got on their neighbour's application. Lots of applications were needing to go to committee, and we were also receiving a lot of complaints. And this led to kind of a low officer mood, as well as a very high number of backlog cases.
So as Helen said, caseloads were really high over this period and kind of continued over a 3-year period, 2020 to 2023. And that kind of led to a backlog build-up in 2 different ways. I'm going to kind of talk about the first way at the beginning. And that was kind of the build-up of applications coming in and how we allocated them out to officers. We'd talked as managers quite a lot about different interventions of how to deal with this. One of the initial things we did is we'd had some recruitment issues in the middle of COVID. We took on a number of casual planners. So on a casual basis, we took on some master's students at Manchester University, contacting the university, and got some casual members of staff. They could work a number of hours that was suitable to them, and we got them kind of working through planning applications, which was a help to begin with. But one of the main interventions that we took was we introduced what we were calling a hold pile, and a number of different councils have talked about this. It's kind of holding applications at validation stage. They've been validated, but we don't allocate them to officers, only allocating them when there was capacity in the team, and that kind of built up a significant backlog of applications. So when they were getting through to officers, they were either over time or very near the time, so we're having to get EOTs at that point, and it was putting a lot of pressure on officers. And this kind of continued right through this COVID period to March 2023. This was kind of gaining traction corporately. Senior directors, chief executive weren't happy with where we were going with this, and we were very, very conscious of our performance figures. So we knew that we had to make a response to this. Complaints were really high as well, firefighting constantly on this. So what we did was we allocated all the whole pile in one fell swoop to all officers. All officers included managers, team leaders, head of service even took 5 applications, heritage officers, and that worked so well. We dealt with most of the applications in the 8 to 10 week period, and we set a very clear process in motion of limiting negotiations, which we'll talk about a little bit further on. But it was really, really good for morale. So we got rid of that backlog, but what that kind of left was a backlog within officer caseloads, these hard, sticky, complex cases that had built up, and that really gave us a very clear case to apply for the backlog skills, the backlog funding through the Planning Skills Delivery Fund.
So we were successful in our bid. We were awarded 97,000 to deal with the backlog of planning applications, which was over 400. And we started by doing an internal audit of all cases. I think what's come across through the presentations is, you know, lots of data, lots of monitoring, and we did a traffic light colour coding of all the applications in terms of complexity. And not surprisingly, most of them were amber or red. A lot of the straightforward applications had gone. There was no easy wins, and so we were aware that we mainly had complex householders and minor applications which needed a lot of work in terms of consultee. So we've got a lot of conservation areas within Trafford, so there was a need for heritage input. So with the funding, we kind of took a two-pronged approach. We allowed officers to work on their backlog kind of day to day, but we also started overtime in the week and at weekends. And then we also went out to consultants to pick up on new applications coming in, so on new kind of simple householders. And in terms of the consultants we used, we worked with Capita, who we'd worked with before, so we kind of knew the quality of what we got. We had a good working relationship with them, and they are paid by the application rather than the hour. So there is a real emphasis on getting the work done. They want to kind of work on as many applications as possible, so that really helps in kind of moving things through the system. And then officers have the opportunity to clear their backlog through the overtime. And this is just a spreadsheet of doom. It was just all our backlog cases. This is a small snapshot, so yeah, it wasn't a positive picture, unfortunately.
So I'm just going to talk about what we called Backlog Club, and this was our overtime sessions. It was just, we tried to make it a light-hearted time for people and for officers, and it wasn't a mandatory thing that we made. It was all voluntary, and we had quite a good uplift in officers wanting to be involved. I think they really appreciated the opportunity to earn some extra cash. But also it was kind of, we found that officers felt empowered in being able to deal with some of the backlog applications. So we did 2 evenings a week for 3 hours, and then Saturday mornings, and officers could pick and choose when they attended those sessions. And it was quite we had to kind of micromanage it quite a lot in terms of what types of cases officers could do within the hours that they'd signed up for. But one of the key takeaways we found was that fresh eyes was the biggest thing. Having a lot of our applications reallocated to a new officer, and then being able to kind of cut through all of the issues and just get to the crux of the matter, sit down with the team leader and say, this is what I think it is, this is how I want to decide it, and get into that kind of place very quickly in the process, and then give them time to write it up. We felt that was really, really positive. But also what we found is that officers really enjoyed the atmosphere that was created in these kind of sessions, away from the day-to-day emails and phones, really kind of peaceful. Officers felt that they really enjoyed it, and that was kind of where the kind of fun idea of Backlog Club and the virtual Backlog Club, just trying to make it light-hearted and make people want to be focused and get on with the work, but not make it a real formal thing. And it went down really well, really positive, and really officers really got a lot out of it. It was really good for morale and well-being. And we've got through about 300 applications in these backlog sessions, and it's been really, really reduced our backlog down. We've finished the overtime in our current form, and we've got a core backlog which we know are quite sticky cases, and we're dealing with these as we work through our new ways of working process. We're kind of wanting to take the officers on the journey with us for that, and what we found is that officers want to be involved and they want to work with us on new ways of working. But the key thing for us is ongoing monitoring, looking at the data. And I know this has already been repeated so many times, but constant monitoring, constant reminders, constant updates on progress has been really beneficial for us getting to that point. Oh, and that's just my favourite thing in the world, which is my backlog monitoring spreadsheet. This is something that I kind of look at every day, update, colour coordinated. It makes me feel happy when I can delete applications out of this. But knowing the backlog inside out, and again, I know that's been talked about before, but that's been really, really beneficial.
So in terms of where we're going now, as well as the kind of the high level of ongoing monitoring, we are looking at kind of a new protocol. I know people have mentioned this, but the tough love approach. So this is involving officers, but also being communicated to members and to agents, and really limit the amount of negotiation that we're having on applications. Saying to staff and to agents that we're not going to work on EOTs and house orders if it's not good enough. It should be refused. We have very clear policy and guidance within Trafford, and we're kind of really pushing that. But we are working with our officers, so we've got a kind of a ways of working kind of group, and we've kind of spoken to officers about kind of what are the blockers. We're looking at kind of process from kind of receiving an application to determination, and saying, you know, how do we improve the efficiencies? How do we kind of move applications through that process quicker? And we're talking with our consultees about kind of responses and conditions, and we're trying to kind of really speed up the process, but also maintaining kind of a high level of kind of service and you know, quality decision making. So there's lots of things to balance, and it's an ongoing process. But yes, we are kind of really trying to limit the use of EOTs, really trying to shift the mentality of a lot of our agents who think that they can just continuously come back to us on the same application. And so we are really plugging our PPA service and our pre-op service. It's been really helpful, and you know, it also brings in much needed finance to the department. And we're also offering this for conditions, which has been a major area of work for us, where, you know, a lot of our conditions are going out of time. They're submitted with kind of pretty much no information, so we can deal with it straight away now. In terms of refusals, we are refusing more applications. And we are seeing an increase in appeals, but I'd say within Trafford, we've always received a high number of appeals. So what we're making sure is, whilst we want officers' reports to be succinct, we also want them to be of a really high quality, so that when appeals come in, that appeal statement is pretty much written and ready to go. But I think the main emphasis is on kind of really empowering officers to kind of go with the changes that we're making.
Okay, so just to wrap up that kind of swift run through lessons learned, I think the things that we've really learned or discovered whilst trying to deal with our backlog is that fresh eyes for us have been really helpful, particularly because what we were dealing with was lots of complex and sticky cases. The officers obviously needed to talk with the original case officer, but being able to have that fresh look, getting to grips with the main issues has been really, really helpful. And also being having the confidence in our decision making and giving that to officers as well, to know that this is no good, this application is a refusal. We could try and negotiate, but we're never going to get to a place where we are happy. So making those quick decisions confidently is something that we've learned we need to do, and that's what we're embedding into our new ways of working. It saves us time in the long run, and then it saves out these drawn out discussions, and we can have those drawn out discussions in a pre-app process once we've refused that original application. Also, I think one of the really key things and what we've been doing is we've kind of finding blockers, areas of training need, areas that need further input from managers to help officers follow through. And what we've been doing is looking at training and having lunch and learn sessions where we have our waste consultee come along and talk to officers about waste, about sustainability, heritage. All of the consultees kind of come in, putting a face to name and talking through issues and really kind of bringing on officers. We've got lots of new officers, so that's been really helpful as well in terms of trying to limit those blockers to the process. So for us, the overtime worked really, really well in the short term, giving officers that some extra money and a morale boost, but we were really aware that that was time limited, and we really didn't want officer burnout, which is why we've kind of drawn a line under that for now. Also, what the funding has done for us is it's allowed us time to look and set up these new ways of working, which we wouldn't have necessarily had otherwise. And having these kind of ongoing daily and weekly monitoring, that's been really positive. The biggest risks to us in terms of backlog is knowing that the funding that we'd got was not just a short-term fix, and that we have to embed these long-term changes. And I think anyone who's looking to deal with a backlog really needs to think about, once you're processing the applications, you're going to have a large number of cases coming through for sign-off. So making sure you've got processes in place to have officers ready to deal with that sign-off as well. And I think this has already been talked about as well, but, you know, government changes, who knows where we're going to go with the recent changes in government, making sure that we're aware of that and being able to adapt and change, and particularly BNG, making sure that doesn't have an impact on backlog going forward. So that's really a really swift run through of our backlog project. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen and Sarah. I'm just going to bring other Sarah back on because we've had some questions that are specifically for what you've talked about. So Sarah, I'm going to Sarah Ashley, I'm going to come to you first because your charging for amendments has generated, I think, a lot of interest from people on the call. So people saying, can you talk a little bit more about the £200 flat fee? And somebody asking, that's great. How do you stop naughty agents from just submitting amended plans anyway without paying the fee?
We won't accept them if they don't pay the fee, essentially. So it's discretionary whether or not you accept amended plans. Hence, that's how we're charging for the service. It's a discretionary service, and it's up to the local planning authority whether to accept them or not. So if they don't pay the fee, we don't entertain it. Like I say, it was something that was requested by the agents because it was made very clear to them that we lose money processing householder applications. It costs us more to deliver than we are allowed to ask for in fees. So it was something they were very keen to do. So actually it's been quite well received, and most people will just St Albans is a bit of a cash rich, time poor place to work. So they didn't, most householders didn't even look at it. What was your other question? I think there was something else. How are we managing it?
Yeah.
Again, I've got a web page that sets out the process for anybody who wants to Google it on the website. But it makes it very clear that what the policy is, that your case officer will be in touch with you to agree what the changes are before you're allowed to really submit. So it's very much about, and there's a standard template that the officers send out following the discussion. So it's very clear that the officer's in control of the process. And I think I firmly believe that that should always be the case, whether or not it's chargeable.
Well, that's great. And then we've got a question for Helen and Sarah at Trafford saying, Backlog Club sounds like a lot of fun. How did you stop officers putting off completing the day-to-day work so that they could, I suppose, have fun at Backlog Club and get paid for it?
It's a really good question, and we did kind of talk about this quite a lot, about how we would manage this, and it was, unfortunately, it was very micromanaged. We knew, we agreed before each session what each officer would be working on and a time scale for those applications to be dealt with. So a little bit of trust and micromanagement.
Yeah, we could see the work in office. Often people were getting work from other officers. So we did not, nobody actually was doing that. I mean, that would have been quite clever, but no, people were good.
They embraced it, yeah.
They did.
I'm just going to bring the rest of the speakers back on, and then we've got some more kind of general questions that have been posted in the chat for everyone to kind of cover. So the one I'm going to go to, which sounds really interesting, is what do you all think the implication of mandatory BNG is going to be in terms of increasing backlogs and how that might be managed?
Maybe I'm sorry, because
Shall I start with that? I think the silence probably says it all, doesn't it? That we actually haven't had an application which has gone through the system yet with BNG. Actually, I think I heard a rumour that Trafford had done one recently, if that might be right. So yes, I heard a rumour. So we'll all be looking at Trafford's website to see what they did and for their committee. But yeah, I think it's going to have an implication and slow things down. I think as councils take the first ones through, it's going to be a slowing down of the process where we all work out what we're doing.
Yeah.
I'll jump in then since we've been name checked. Yes, I think what we've done, and Sarah is our BNG guru, so you know, whether she wants that title or not, we have kind of tried to preempt the situation, and we, as part of our lunch and learn, we had a legal team come in, private firm come in to do training to all officers, and we're also doing training to all our members, so that the committee, they know what to expect. We've done a lot of templates of conditions and informatives, and we've really tried to front load it. And try to kind of demystify it, because there's a lot of information out there, but then when you kind of peel it back, how you actually do it,
Yeah, I think that all of that, but I think it's just we don't know what impact it's going to have. Yeah, we've got the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit here in Trafford who are excellent, but it's also about the workload that they're dealing with, all 10 Greater Manchester authorities. And the first one went through because I think it was the first one, and but I think we really have to keep an eye on it, and we're keeping a list of all BNG relevant applications that are coming in and keeping an eye on where they're up to. So I think again it's that keeping on top of the data, keep monitoring and talking to officers and seeing where they're up to and seeing what we can do to break them blockers down. But I don't think anybody has got the answer. I think it's just about keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, it does feel slightly early days, really, in terms of sort of the volume of applications it's applicable to kind of dripping through the system at the moment.
I think that a presentation I saw from DLUC on it, they were saying they thought that maybe only 5% of minor applications would end up, they did some road testing on it, so they thought only 5% would end up being liable. Just from a Hackney perspective on this, was actually discussing with colleagues last week about it. We have car-free and small sites affordable housing policies, so we're kind of anticipating that most schemes that require BNG are also going to require Section 106 anyway, so we'll just look to manage it through Section 106. But yeah, sort of we're going to look carefully at what the implications might be for backlog, kind of road test it for a year or so.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to kind of pick the most pertinent questions from the chat, and we will try to respond and sort of create a bit of a Q&A for the ones we don't get to. But this one caught my eye as something that probably everybody on the call struggles with. Do you all have any advice on managing issues with the delays or lack of responses from statutory and internal consultees?
I can jump in on this one, Charlie.
Who's cracked that nut? Yeah.
What we do is that we'll always basically try and have a meeting with them very early doors before we know it's a problem. So we're a district authority, so we're a 2-tier one. So obviously the county are highway authorities. We get the county in. We've done it with the LFA as well at the moment. I know it's already been discussed today. Having that personal communication with them is absolutely vital. And the same true with internal consultees. It's just about developing a relationship, really.
Yeah, I was going to say we've with some consultees we've got prioritisation lists. So and we try to get them to look at quick wins. If it's a quick resub and it's just one thing, we try to get them to treat that as a quick win and triage their own things through the prioritisation list. That does help a bit. I'm also looking at one of the SLAs and whether if we have to refund fees because they didn't perform, whether we can put some sort of clawback in it, because if their service hampers our ability to make a decision, then they should take some of the financial hit too.
Yeah, and well, I suppose, Trafford, you were mentioning the sort of lunch and learn, so it sounds like it's quite good relationships. Has anybody managed to crack the nut with the statutory consultee? Okay, yeah, I think that's an ongoing challenge at the moment, and there's resourcing issues on all sides in local authorities and at statutory consultees as well. So we've got 1 minute to go. So I think we could probably talk about one more question if everyone's happy to. And somebody wanting to know if any kind of processes have been majorly adapted since lockdown. For example, fewer site visits, more reliance on kind of Google Street View. Has anyone kind of, made some long-term shifts around the processes that case officers undertake?
Yeah, we still have some of that. I mean, we're going back to all site visits because, like I said, there's a bit of a gap with our knowledge and training. So I do want officers to do site visits now, but possibly not on LDCs and things where the onus is on the applicant to provide correct information and it's a matter of law. I think we'll never go back from that. I do still get the customers to put up the site notices, and part of that is that they live there for one thing generally, And 2, we had a bit of a councillor consternation with, oh, you put this site notice up and you've left it, and you're causing fly posting. They do tend to take them down more if they put them up. And I haven't had strong objections to that, so it's just another win, really. I strongly believe what Hackney said about that those 10 minutes that you can save do all add up. Not to quote Tesco, but every little helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you pop up.
I think that's great. Does anybody kind of want to come in on that point? I'm conscious we're probably at time now.
Yeah, you just
good. Well, that just leaves me to say thank you all so much for agreeing to take part in this webinar today. That was a sort of bit of brainchild of mine from talking to you all, some of which, yes, Graham was listening to rants down the pub, planning in the pub, and I it's really interesting. You've all had slightly different journeys through dealing with backlogs, but there's definitely been some reoccurring themes around kind of a culture change, the importance of getting buy-in from the teams, the importance of being seen to be sort of taking charge and sort of demonstrating that leadership in a really visible way. I think is a key part of that kind of culture change and bringing everybody on that journey with being really visible and that kind of communications to teams and having everybody on board. And the importance of data and knowing what the data is showing and interrogating it and being on top. So those to me feel some of the really big takeaways. And I think whatever council you're from, whatever your backlog is, those are the sort of fundamental keystones of implementing slow or incremental or even really big changes around addressing caseloads and performance management. So thank you very much for taking the time to prepare presentations and take part in the webinar today. We will be making the recording available and slides available and making a short kind of FAQ. Anyone who's signed up for today will receive an email saying when that's available. So thank you very much and see you all hopefully again at another PAS event soon.
Thank you.